podcast, A Penny for Your Thoughts with me, Steve Penny. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to be talking to some great people. I hope you enjoy listening in. Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you very much for joining me today, Duncan. It's great to see you. I enjoyed our conversation when we met a few weeks ago.
It was good.
And I'm looking forward to seeing where today's conversation goes. So if you wouldn't mind starting off with a brief sort of summary of your career to date, who you are, what you do, and then we'll start getting into more in-depth on the question.
Yeah, I mean, going backwards, I'm currently a Member of Parliament, Christchurch Central, here in the central city. Prior to that, I was a lawyer working largely in kind of earthquake claims after the Canterbury earthquakes. And before that, with some interludes, I was an academic, a law academic here at Canterbury, Victoria, and also Massey University. So that's the very short version.
What about your home life?
Yeah, I live here in Christchurch in St Albans in a big old house, and I've actually just nipped off and grabbed a birthday cake because my youngest child is turning 23. So he and my older son as well live with me and one of the girlfriends. So it's a bit of a commune establishment there. But I really enjoy having my adult kids living with me.
Yeah, we had my eldest, Caitlin, actually working out there. She was with us from July last year up till Christmas, and she's now moved out with her boyfriend into a place up by the airport. But it was good having her back home as an adult rather than as a child.
Oh, that's right. And as long as you treat them as adults, right? Yeah, I sometimes think that our insistence that we all live separately is it's come from a particular moment in time.
Yeah, I think it's a very Western view of how you live as a family, isn't it? I think if you look wider, if you look at the way that the Maori live and you look at the way that Asians live, it's much more of a family unit, a bigger family unit.
Yeah, and there's some resilience in that, right? If you've got 3 or 4 generations in a household, there's a lot of people to spread the work around.
Yeah, and also I think you get that with bringing children up, it becomes, what's that saying? It's that a child is brought up by a village, and at the moment we try and do it on our own in this side of things, and I don't think
it takes a village to raise a child and only one parent to really screw it up.
Yes.
Oh, and I don't think that second half is part of the saying.
You're right. I think you're right. The second half is quite important. You're a Member of Parliament now. How long have you been an MP for?
Since 2017. So that's the Jacinda wave. I came in with Jacinda.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Excellent. What prompted you to make that change from being a lawyer to being an MP?
Oh, look, I've been in politics for a while, one way or another, just involved with the Labour Party. And my concerns were about how people were being treated, and that's why I've been part of the Labour Party throughout. Yeah. And I guess I'd been practicing law, helping people with earthquake claims for 6 or 7 years doing that work since the earthquakes. Yeah. And I was really frustrated. And I also kind of had that moment in time where I thought, well, if I'm ever going to get into politics, now's the time. Because in my mid-40s, it was kind of now or never, in my view, my own mind, that I didn't want to start politics when I was in my mid-50s, because I think that's probably...
You're not in the US.
No, that's right.
You're 10 years past retirement.
To be honest, getting in there and realise, looking around, I forget exactly how old I was, about 47. I was at the very much the older end of new MPs, and there's a reason for that. It is you need a lot of energy to keep at it.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think that I've noticed about myself, if I'm perfectly honest, I grew up in a very conservative household in the UK. Very much we don't vote Labour in this household. And that probably coloured my early view of politics and probably followed that route for a good while. But I've noticed in the last 10 years that I'm getting more and more socialist in my view.
Well, it's good to hear. There's redemption for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think is, like you say, that looking out for everybody else, that we don't do that very well. And I've noticed that there's sections of society that are really badly serviced by most of us, really.
Yeah.
Particularly for me, the homeless. I think that we live in a rich country, and we shouldn't have people living on the streets. And things like that, and the way that the political environment has been globally, which is very much them against everybody else, it feels like we need to be more focused on our communities and less focused on ourselves. And I find it quite hard to accept the way we treat everyone around us.
Yeah, look, and there is enough to go around, right? and that's the thing. You look at some excesses at one end, and you look at the abject poverty and deprivation at the other, and there is enough to go around.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly enough work to go around for everybody if you want to make it available, and there's enough food and everything else available, and yet we seem to be making the society more and more divided rather than more and more joined at the moment. So,
I agree with that.
It's a challenge for sure. So, I suppose you've been a lawyer for quite a while prior to getting into politics?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's actually quite a tricky question, because in some ways I was a lawyer when I graduated from university, got my first job. But it's a diverse kind of calling, and so I still considered myself a lawyer when I was teaching, because I'd dabble and I'd be teaching law, and it was all about the profession. So in a sense, I've been a lawyer all my life. And certainly the early years of practice in law school, they teach you to approach problems a particular way, which is sometimes advantageous, but not always.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's a bit like engineering. I mean, engineering is a very broad church as well. You can be an engineer of many different things. Yeah, and it's about having, I guess, a good general knowledge and then focusing on a particular area when you need to. And I've certainly found with my career's allowed me to travel around the world, and it's kind of engineering's engineering wherever you are.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the blessings, yeah.
But lawyering, other than subtle changes around particular local areas, the lawyering is probably very similar.
It is, in many ways, as with a lot of professions, it gives you tools, right? Intellectual tools and analytical tools. And as long as you know how to use those well, you can kind of, whatever raw material of a problem you're thrown, you can work through it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's good. What would you say at the moment would be your proudest professional achievement?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, because I've had a diverse set of jobs, but probably the one thing that I'll look back on and think I made a substantive change is actually not in politics. It's in academia, when I was doing professional ethics, was my kind of one of my specialist subject areas, and I helped the Law Society redraft the rules of professional conduct for lawyers. Oh, right. So if ever you're going to complain against your lawyer and you want to go through the rules, chances are you'll be reading something that I wrote. I look back on them now and I think, well, there's room for improvement. But at the time, it was a massive leap forward for how clients and essentially customers were served by the legal profession. And it got a lot of pushback. It was actually quite politically hard to get across the line. Yeah. But that's something which will be there. That kind of change will have a lasting impact on a lot of New Zealanders' lives.
Yeah. Why do you think there was pushback?
Lawyers are inherently conservative. Pardon?
Risk averse?
More than that, just change averse. Because that is the way the law is, the case law method, and just the very culture of the law is what is there already is the way we do things. And you look at the fact they still wear black gowns that really come from the 17th century to court. They're, even their fashion sense is outdated. But
so the wigs, don't understand.
Yeah, well, the wigs are gone. But again, I mean, when kind of the barrister's profession came about in the 1700s, we froze it in time. And so the gown that was used there, the wigs that we used there became the attire. And it was kind of the attire of a petty gentleman, not an aristocrat, and so that's what we were expected to wear forever. And I can tell you from experience, when I first practiced law, worn those wigs, they are horrible. Yeah. They're sweaty and they're smelly, and your head itches. Yeah.
I mean, one question I've always wondered about lawyers versus solicitors is that there's obviously a distinction between the two, and I've never really understood what the distinction is.
If you think about it in the sense that any profession will try and protect its patch as much as it can, then the English division became the kind of most senior, most high status lawyers trying to protect their patch, and that was barristers. Right. So they were the ones who had a right of audience in court. Yeah. And they said no one else can do this. So then solicitors had to carve out their patch, and their patch was essentially transactional work and preparatory work for courts. in New Zealand, because we, were settled in the 1840s by the English colonialists, we didn't really have enough lawyers to go around, so we merged them. So everyone in New Zealand is both a barrister and solicitor. Yeah, so here's a little bit of potted history. I feel like I'm back in law school.
No, it's good to know, though. It's good to understand.
Yeah.
I've always seen overseas, UK primarily, that you do have a distinction between the barrister and the solicitor. The solicitor kind of seems to be an underling, I guess.
Yeah, in status, that was absolutely the case and remains the case. One of the big barriers to become a barrister in the UK is the pupillage, right, which is an unpaid, I think, 1 year internship, which pretty much means you have to come from money to be able to, go without an income for a year.
Yeah, that's not me. Okay. In terms of your career today, is there something, what was it that really changed? Is there one single thing that really changed your perspective on how you view things around you and made a fundamental change to you?
Look, I think in Christchurch, the earthquake changes the way a lot of people think.
Yeah.
And certainly what I saw, the day itself was obviously a massive and in many ways traumatising event for many people. But in many ways, that was when my optimistic naivety around government changed because and also just the commercial world generally, because overnight I saw essentially the drawbridge get pulled up in terms of the help that was being made available to people.
Yeah.
And whilst there was lip service paid to it. I mean, I think in my maiden speech, I said, I thought that the law was there to protect the vulnerable, and what I saw was it being used as a weapon to attack them. And that's when I thought, well, hang on, this can't be right. And I think that's the ongoing struggle of politics, which is there's a natural tendency to kind of bureaucratise everything and dehumanise it, turn it into a system. And that's what happened with EQC, insurance companies and the whole, and the council and a whole lot. And that's when I was like, well, no, we've got to change the government because we've got to change this. And I think we did. I mean, you asked me what my big professional achievement was, and I named one in the law. But, the Earthquake Tribunal, the Claims Resolution Service, a whole lot of the review, the Royal Commission on EQC, the new EQC Act, that all came because of a change of government that I was part of, and I'm really proud of that too.
Yeah. I don't think rightly so. I mean, it was a very difficult period of time for Christchurch as a city and for the people of Christchurch. And I think, you look back over the last 13, 14 years, and Christchurch has been subject to a couple of horrendous events. And I do think that it's changed our view of the world around us quite a lot. The shooting at the mosque was something that really struck home for me. I was actually driving very close to the avenue when that happened, Dean's Avenue, and I saw all the police had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
I ended up getting stuck in a meeting with the client for about 3.5 hours because the building was put into lockdown, and just like that, that whole situation and realising a whole section of our community was being marginalised to some extent because of it, and the impact of global politics really on Christchurch itself.
Yeah.
It's quite a shocking event for a lot of reasons, and that on top of the earthquakes, and then the world being affected by the pandemic, all of these things, Christchurch has borne quite a lot, and the rest of the world obviously with the pandemic has been impacted, but I think Christchurch was already in a pretty battered state by the time of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, but one of the things I found through the earthquakes was that people who have had practice are actually better at surviving shocks and trauma, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and I was dealing with people's homes and so on largely. And you get people whose lives had been perfect up till then, and they were very poorly equipped for the kind of setbacks that faced them. Whereas people whose lives had been a history of being ill-treated kind of managed to roll with what was going on and make the best of it, So it's really interesting. But you're right.
I think there's a lot that plays into that, isn't it? Your own life experience certainly colours your ability to deal with certain situations, And there's a lot to be said for having that experience, not just being protected from life.
Oh, I think that's right. And and I think that's, so, although I've still got my children living at home with me, as we said, pushing them out and seeing them knocked around a bit and not protecting them too much, it's really important.
Yeah, and that's the same. I mean, we've got 3 kids ourselves. The youngest, our youngest Lucy's 21 this year. She's up at Massey at the moment doing year 3 of the vet science degree. So she's taken on a big challenge there.
Yeah.
And she's doing really well. Caitlin's 25 this year, so she's doing well herself and working for me at the moment. How long that goes on for, I don't know. It's been almost a year now. So.
Oh well, and I hope she's subject to the same rigorous employment conditions as everyone else.
Yeah. No nepotism here. And then my son Jonathan as well. He's 23. He's living away from home with his partner, and that. So they're all sort of grown up and doing their own thing to a large extent, and it's great to see as a parent. That's what you want to see, that they can stand on their own 2 feet and do what they need to do. Influences. Who would you say have been your biggest influences? I'm going to guess one of them.
Well, go on then. You guess, and I'll tell you whether you got it all right.
Well, I'm actually going to suggest that maybe Jacinda was in there somewhere as an influencer.
Yeah, look, obviously I worked with Jacinda for her prime ministership. About 5 years. I mean, one of my really interesting roles was chief whip, which it's a funny role. In part, it's largely administrative, but it's also kind of troubleshooter. And so when she resigned, I was one of the very first to know, because my job was to manage what happened next. So I needed to know before the entire caucus did. And that was one of those moments in time that you'll never forget. It was very it's shocking for me as well. Was she a major influence? Certainly, I learned a lot from her. I was we talked about the mosque attack, and I was in the room when she was speaking to the mosque families, and there's that famous photo of her that someone took through the window. So, and seeing the way she managed to both be strong and very compassionate was amazing, and just set the tone. And I guess that leadership style, something, But having said that, I don't think I would ever emulate her, because I don't think you can.
No, she was a point in time, wasn't she?
That's exactly right. Yeah. But certainly she's a really significant person who I've worked really closely with. But equally, other people who, one of the things about going to Parliament, the House of Representatives, is you realise how representative it is. Mm-hmm. And coming from Christchurch, from the legal profession, as we've said, a conservative profession, you have a particular view. But in fact, one of the things that's been both fascinating and fabulous is just working with some of my Māori colleagues and being confronted with the totally different way of approaching life and politics, and having to kind of much more than upskill, but really become much more aware that there's a myriad of different views out there.
I think one thing that I've had the good fortune to be on a couple of boards working with some Māori guys, and I came to realise that we have a very disciplined and very narrow approach to governance that doesn't fit with every culture that we are part of, and particularly the way we set up governance for businesses and for charities is how you do it in the West.
Yeah.
It's got no reflection on how that kind of governance is done with
culture. I mean, and I've had some really useful interactions. I've done one of the Institute of Directors courses, right? But I think there is, and certainly the Institute is keen on diversity in boards. Yeah. But at the same time, there is a sense that boards are done a particular way.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that we're as accommodating as we could be to totally new ways of looking about how we make decisions about strategy and direction for companies, charities, and what have you.
Yeah, it's a very much a European view on how things are done.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, the issue around co-governance or inclusion of others in decision making on a basis that isn't simply representative, it's something more than that. Yeah. That's we face challenges in communicating that as being not an alarmist thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a level of fear for some reason associated with change. Like you said earlier on, that lawyers don't like change. I don't think any of us really like change.
You're right. And
I think when there's a change, particularly if it's to a system or to a way of doing things that you don't actually understand, then that fear becomes much more paralysing, I think. I think there's a communication. When you look at the issue we've had over in Australia with the locals, like the Indigenous peoples there, that all they want is to have a voice.
I know, and it's just...
you can't even give that.
The interesting thing about that to me is that in New Zealand, the idea that the Indigenous people should at least be asked and have a say, we would kind of ask them, because it's so blindingly obvious that it's appropriate. And we think, well, didn't we sort that one out in the 1970s? Well, I think we sorted the let's ask question out there, which is where Australia is at now. Yeah. But the amazing thing is Australia, with who culturally we're really close, still don't see that. It's really important to recognise that it's not because they don't mean well; they're just an entirely different place. Yeah.
Different part of that journey.
Yeah,
for sure. And I think it's something that you're seeing globally as well. That this recognition that First Peoples actually deserve a voice is, from my perspective as an English person, I'm very aware of my heritage and the white privilege side of things that has come out more to the fore than I can ever remember in my life recently. I mean, to be honest, until it started becoming a thing in the US and was all of this talk about white privilege happened, it never even occurred to me. And I'm fortunate that my wife is Chinese, my children are half Chinese, and I actually sat down and had a conversation with my wife and kids about this, and it was really confronting for me because they told me stuff that I didn't understand, like my kids told me about the bullying they'd received because of the way they look. My wife told me about the bullying that she'd had because of the way she looks. And they just accepted that that's what happened. And it hurt that I didn't know that it was happening.
Yeah.
Because I'd never experienced it. I had no frame of reference, I guess.
And I think that's the point, isn't it? That looping back to what I said about arriving in Parliament and realising there's a whole lot of different ways to look at the world or worlds to live in. Yeah. And I mean, we can only live in our own world, and we can only make our best efforts to understand what it's like to live in someone else's world. And I think, but it's an effort, right? It's not something that you can do passively.
No, you have to make a distinct effort to say, right, I want to see the things from your perspective. Yeah. And I think that is probably the part of what has driven my changing view. That, I've got a very one-sided view of the world because of my upbringing. And, it's not something that I've actively courted, but I do realise looking back that I've had opportunities that maybe others wouldn't have had. And it's quite strange to start thinking about yourself in those terms, I think.
Yeah.
Looking at the advantages that I've had that I'm not even aware were really advantages, but they were, for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's right. And you're right. You're not aware there are advantages at the time because the shoes that you're in, you see the obstacles ahead, not the way they're cleared from you.
Good at seeing the negative.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. In terms of other influences then, anybody else that sort of springs to mind?
Oh, look, I've going way back, you can't really go past your parents. I grew up, my parents also English. I was brought over from the UK when I was a young fella, so I don't really consider myself to be, as English, if you like, more of a New Zealander. But that was a Christian household, very Christian. My father was a pastor, so I think a lot of those values, I'm not, other than popping into the odd church service as a dignitary, I don't really attend or anything like that. But I think that Christian value set, and even just the cultural background that you get from having a pretty good knowledge of kind of the scriptures and so on. I think that's a really significant influence. And I think, in terms of our culture, that's something which is changing. I was talking to some young people about politics and used a biblical allusion, and they had no idea what I was talking about, which took quite some explaining to kind of, and lost the moment. But I think that's a really interesting cultural influence that I have. Yeah.
Yeah. So you think that society is losing that connection to a religion?
Yeah, but I think religion is part of our cultural backdrop as well. Mm-hmm. It's the way if we approach problems, we approach social structures and things like that. And so it's no surprise that, our Indian community has a particular approach because they come from an entirely different religious and cultural background, which is much more mystic. Yes. And much less kind of based on doctrine or scripture or documents, right? So I do think that we are kind of losing that a little bit. Whether that's for good or bad is a separate thing, right?
Yeah, I think there's, I'm not really any kind of religious person. I'd probably say I'm agnostic, if anything. But I think the importance of having a moral compass, something that you sort of judge yourself as whether you're good or bad by, is kind of undervalued at the moment. We talk a lot about blame and who's at fault for doing what, but really I think a lot of the time, if you don't give somebody a set of guidelines, then it's very difficult for them to judge their own behaviour.
Yeah, and certainly that's what, we say that's what the scripture does for us, but the irony is, and I was chatting to a group of kind of progressive Christian leaders recently, that there's a lot of diversity as to what people think's right and wrong, even within one religious community, right? You only need to look at the American conservative Christian right compared to, some of the progressive Christian views of, the Methodists or the Anglicans here in New Zealand, and they're a world apart. So it's
I think the one thing I would say is it doesn't matter what the religion is, but if you're far something, it's usually not a good thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, extremism is generally important.
They're outliers and they tend to be bad.
Yeah.
But I think it's good if we can try. But I think that's part of what's driving us apart as a society is that we're starting to lean more towards the extreme. Whether we're left or right, it seems to be pushing us apart.
Yeah, and that polarisation's a real concern. And I'm very happy to be a member of a party which most people would consider centrist, right? And centrist is sometimes said as if it's a dirty word. But the idea of centrist politics is to actually move the centre with the discussion and not be making change unless you've got a fair body of consensus around it. Yeah. Whereas an extreme view is, this is what we should be doing, and everyone else is wrong, but we're going to do it anyway. That's looking a little dangerous to me.
Yeah, I think what I noticed in the UK political scene is that when we had a more centrist Conservative Party and a more centrist Labour Party, the country was a happier place. The more extremes it's gone to, it's come to a point now, I think, where you have to be extreme to be heard, almost. If you've not got some outspoken view, nobody's listening to you.
Yeah, and that kind of meme politics is a problem, right? Because and it's true that good communicators can capture an idea in a pithy and easily communicated way, but to have to make it outrageous to be heard, that's a real problem.
Yeah. And I think our addiction to social media and clicks and everything else is part of that issue as well, which is a whole other topic. Oh no,
it is a large topic.
But it is a large topic, and I think that, I'm trying to think how long ago it was now, probably about 8-9 years ago, I had to give a presentation. I chose to give a presentation, didn't have to, at a conference that was about digital technology and how it is influencing what we do. But one of the things I did is I did a bit of research and I read some papers around the impact of social media and our access to information on the current generation of kids. And we're talking 5-9 years ago. So it's changed a lot since then. But what the papers were saying is that this is probably the largest ever social experiment, and we have no idea of the impact at this point.
No.
And I think we're starting to see the impact now, that it's become a platform for anybody who wants to shout. And it polarises people because you get all of these algorithms that only reinforce your viewpoint.
Well, that's right. Yeah, the fact...
They don't give you a balanced view anymore.
Yeah, and it's actually, again, it's that whole idea. We are naturally passive. You know, we read things that are put in front of us. We don't search out new and challenging material, or that's an unusual thing to do. And social media gives us stuff that we want to see that is in line with our existing views and reinforces them. It's a really common problem.
It is, and but how do we combat it? I mean, I think part of the issue that we've had through the pandemic is this whole argument around what's real and what's fake news, and that really did bring it to the fore, that you've got people making decisions based on something they read on Facebook rather than on good science, and then not trusting the scientists because Facebook said something else.
Yeah, there's actually a really difficult philosophical problem about what knowledge is, right? And it's been there for a while. It's been there for a couple of millennia. But there is now so much information out there that you can pretty much cherry pick. And, if you, and I'm not suggesting anyone does, but if you want to go and take the time to look at kind of anti-vaxxers and so on, you'll find plenty of people with PhDs talking about stuff which is not well based in science. But how is the uninitiated supposed to sift through that? Yeah,
I mean, that's part of the issue, isn't it? Is that you've got experts that proclaim that they're experts with no basis for their expertise.
Yeah.
But because they say they're an expert, people believe them.
Yeah.
And then you've got a whole section of society that is being corrupted effectively.
Yeah, and in one of the, I was happy to give a paper at the OECD actually on trust in government, and that one of the challenges is that allied with that is an erosion of trust in not just government but authority generally, whether that be the university or doctors or government or whatever. So people actually look askance at information given to them by what would usually be considered a reliable source.
Yeah. How do we do it? I mean, it's a deep question, but how do you think? What do you think is the way forward from this position?
Yeah, I mean the work being done around the Christchurch call is part of that, right? About asking and requiring, where possible, social media providers to have some minimum basis of responsibility, particularly around genuine disinformation, the hosting of information which is clearly wrong, and in sometimes extreme. But look, at the end of the day, I do think most of our young people who are growing up in this environment, which is utterly foreign to people, if I can say our age, can be largely trusted. I do think that we're seeing the worst of it. And when I look at most people who have kind of grown up and they're now in their sort of 20s, they're as aware as anyone that YouTube is a black hole and you can find whatever you want on there, and that it's not the place to go to for information, other than, how to bake a cake. It might be handy for that, but how to fix a disease, let's not go there. Let's go to the hospital for that one.
Yeah. I think you are right. I think we do need to trust, to a large extent, the current generation to be much smarter with this stuff than we are. And I think that's part of the issue. I look at our generation, I think we're going through an enormous amount of transition in our generation. We've gone from no internet at all when I was a kid.
That's right.
Zero.
Yes.
Internet. And, I'm older than Google, which and so you. And so
yes.
In fact, all of our generation.
Yeah, no, I can still.
Older than the internet, which is hard to believe.
Yeah.
But, when I started work, I didn't have a computer.
No, that's right. Yeah, quite extraordinary.
And that, in my short lifespan, 40 years at work this year, the world has changed. I wouldn't recognise it if I went back to 1984.
Yeah.
I would not recognise it.
No, I still remember the day I got linked up with a legal database where I could get copies of cases from Ohio, thousands or millions of cases. That was mind-blowing in 1992, that I could in real time access law libraries around the world in full text, searchable text, and yet now that's not surprising. That's
no,
not.
It's not. No. And that's, I guess, one of the other things I found that I think is an issue that it's maybe I'm making it an issue, but I think that things like Google are starting to kill the art of conversation, because you used to go to a pub and have a beer and talk about stuff, and now if somebody's asked you or says, I think this is the case,
Yeah.
I'm going to check that on Google. No, it's not. End of conversation.
What happened to those long arguments over?
Exactly, yeah. Well, you used to have to think about things. Now you just look at your phone and your phone tells you, and you then relay the information.
Yeah, I guess.
You've almost become a servant of the phone.
Yeah, but that's my point. That you're just being an old bastard. Because, I guess my point is this, things have changed.
Yes.
And it is now the case that your phone becomes an accessory to your conversation.
Yeah.
Pardon?
So change the conversation.
Well, it does change the nature of a conversation, but I think we can still have them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And maybe it's. I think the bigger part of that for me is this reliance on acronyms for everything.
Oh,
Text
yes.
messages in particular.
Yeah. Well, and then that great invention, the emoji, right?
Yes,
you can
exactly.
write an entire sentence without using any letters.
Exactly. What do you do if you want to rest and recharge your batteries? What's your
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I was doing it on Saturday. I was up in the mountains in Craigieburn Forest Park up there, and I was on the mountain bike. It was actually phenomenal. I hadn't been up there, and me and two of my brothers and my girlfriend got up there, and there's some fantastic trails up there, and it was a real workout. It was a brilliant blue day. Still quite cool, getting into autumn. But so that's the sort of thing I really love to do. Is get outdoors, get somewhere where there's not many people, and certainly work a sweat up and get some views in.
Yeah, I think it's mental health. There's a big factor there, but doing something like that is really good for your mental health. I mean, I didn't do the mountain biking, but I went out for a fairly long walk with one of my friends on Friday over in Sumner. Went up over the hill.
Oh, over Godley.
Not quite Godley Head, but just Red Cliffs.
Oh, yeah, nice. Yeah.
And yeah, it was, for me, it was a real workout. Going up the hill was hard work.
Yeah, and it's, certainly in busy jobs, it's about actually planning that ahead and getting the time.
You've got to make the time.
Yeah, absolutely do.
To say I'm too busy.
Yeah.
It's much harder to set aside an hour or two and actually go and do something. So.
Yeah, and I sometimes tend to do it by myself, but probably good to do it with people as well, right? To get those social connections.
Yeah, I think that was good for me. I went with this guy Danny that I know, get on really well with, and we were walking up this hill, and he told me that his wife Cheryl runs up this hill, and I walk up it.
Yeah.
Run up this hill.
I know that feeling. Yeah. I didn't ride my bike up every hill in the weekend, I must say. I'll admit to that. Yeah.
That's good. If you were able to go back to 20-year-old Duncan and give yourself a piece of advice, what do you think you would say? Yeah,
there's probably a few things, but if it was only one thing, it would actually probably be take a year off, right? I think at about that age, I was in far too much of a rush.
Yeah.
Having just finished a law degree and having come from a background where there wasn't a lot of money kicking around, I think I was really worried about security, and securing my place in work and getting some money behind me and all those kinds of things. But if I look back now, probably just pausing and taking a big deep breath and looking around and thinking, what actually do you want to do in the longer term? I might have done the same thing. I'm not, no regrets and all, but I think it would have been a really healthy thing to do, and probably also in the long term, just recognising that you don't have to work absolutely every hour of every day.
Yeah, I think that's something I reflected on when I started this business, is that a lot of business that I worked to, you had to be there all the time, and if you weren't, you weren't working. And I set out my stall to say, actually, I don't want to be somebody who says everyone's going to be here doing 70-hour weeks, because I don't think it's the way you get the best out of people around you, as for a start. And I think my business is based much more on trust. You know what you've got to do. You know when you've got to do it by. I'm trusting you to do the hours you need to get it done. And it's worked out most of the time, that we've hit our deadlines and we've delivered what we need to do. And the guys appreciate the flexibility, that if they need to take a bit of time off because they've got some family stuff they need to do, they take it. And it's not a big issue.
Yes.
That sort of giving that flexibility and having that level of trust is really important. It took me a long time to understand that.
Yeah, some businesses are sustainable, but they churn through people, right? But I'd rather have a business that's sustainable for its people as well.
Yes.
And certainly, I've come through organisations where the work expectations meant you either had to be a kind of bizarrely capable person right at the end of one extreme, or you couldn't last. And you see, essentially the bodies by the wayside. And certainly I wouldn't be interested in getting back into a business of that model.
It does seem that law in particular seems to be a business where you're expected to do a lot of hours because you need to be billable and all that. There's that real driver around how many hours are you billing this week and this month.
Yeah, and certainly there are some law firm models that look like that. And a lot of the big law firms, that's how they work. That's how they have accountabilities. And, when I was an academic, I looked at that, is the hours, or minutes that you're billed, is that a good billing model? It's got high accountability, but extremely low trust.
Yeah. I think that's the part of it, isn't it? That there is a degree of trust required to run a healthy business. And if every minute has to be allowed for and accounted for, it kind of tells everyone around that I don't trust you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, changing the subject again. What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading. I've got a mountain of books. I have a terrible habit of dipping into books. So by my bed, I've got Working with David, which is David Longie's, a biography of David Longie, and a book on the Himalayas, which is it's interesting. It's kind of part scientific, part social history. And then down in the front room where it's sunny in the afternoon, I've just got a mountain of books on economics and political history and all sorts. Some from sort of the 1930s. In fact, I've got a fascinating one, which is the history of the Communist Party as approved by the Soviet Communist Party and printed in the 1940s. Yeah, but it's fascinating. That's a historical document more than anything, right? We know it's not going to be particularly accurate or unbiased.
That's kind of Karl Marx.
Yeah, well, more Joseph Stalin, to be perfectly honest.
Version.
Yeah.
Marxist, Leninist doctrine.
I'm a terrible dipper into of books, and I won't finish them all, but I'll finish some of them.
What would you say would be one of... Is there a book that you go back to?
Is there a book I go back to? I actually dip into reading some mathematics, which is... Yeah, I know. It's just one of those odd... And the reason... Well, it's one of those things you can do because it's so wildly different. And I'm no good at it. I just want to make that very clear. I'm not a gifted mathematician in any way. But maths and logic problems, they use an entirely different set of mental muscles, right? And for me, it's really good. I, in fact, got into maths when I was teaching law, and I thought I should do something hard, the arts and writing essays was easy. So I thought, I'll take a maths paper. And I got a B-. I barely scraped through. Well, it was a first year maths paper. It was interesting. I was sitting next to students who would be half listening and scribbling notes down, whereas I had to use every ounce of concentration to understand what was going on and keeping up. And it was like I understood. It helped me be a better teacher because I understood what it would be like to be in a second language class, right? Because I didn't speak the language of maths. And so I had to kind of retranslate into spoken word all of these symbols, and because that's how I did things. And I never got fluent. But anyway, that's kind of an aside. So, yeah.
No, that's interesting. My own experience with maths, obviously I'm an engineer, so maths is what I do. But I did have quite a confronting experience when I was doing my university education, that I encountered imaginary numbers.
Oh, yeah. And
it was something I really struggled to get my head around at the time. So I said to the lecturer during one of the lectures, can you explain why we need an imaginary number? And he just looked at me and went, you'll never understand, you just have to accept it. And at that point, my brain said, well, I'm not interested then. If you can't be bothered to explain it, I can't be bothered
Yeah,
to
there you go. Yeah.
You know, it was completely disengaged me because it just totally undermined me.
Whereas there's a whole story in there, right?
Well, yes, apparently.
Well, we can do that next week.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, that's the point I guess I'm making there is that, you know, there is it's his own language, and it's something that is fundamental to what I do.
Yeah.
There's parts of it I'm never going to understand because I've not opened myself up to that opportunity.
Yeah, and I guess that's right. But I mean, and I did do a degree in philosophy as well, and I think that's probably how I got into maths because it's those things like imaginary numbers that you can write an equation that has an answer that doesn't make sense on a normal number line, right?
In my head, I said, you're making it up because you can't make it work unless you do.
Right, yes, perhaps that's it.
That's the way I looked at it, but that's really why I wanted an explanation because, you know, I can see the logic to some extent.
Yeah.
But then it just kind of lost me when that lecturer just wasn't interested in putting the time in.
Yeah.
And mathematics is fundamental to our lives. You know, everything we do. What's going on in front of me on this computer screen at the moment with our recording is all digital.
Yeah, absolutely.
All algorithms being written. It's all mathematics.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us really don't have enough of a grip on mathematics as we should have.
I think that's right. And but even just the tools, and again, the tools it gives you, the way of thinking about problems, it's a different way of doing things again.
Absolutely, yeah. I think some of the time you can be roadblocked by an issue because you've only got one way of approaching it. Sometimes you need to have think outside the box or come from a different direction, and that mathematical, analytical approach might help you get around an issue you otherwise can't resolve.
Yeah.
It's an interesting subject for sure. One other thing, the dinner party question. If you're going to have a dinner party, you invite two guests along, people that you'd like to have a conversation with.
Oh, two guests.
Live, fictional, non-fictional.
Yeah. Well, you'd have to have a good philosopher, but there's so many options, right? Maybe Socrates, because he never wrote anything down, right? Yeah. You'd be able to ask him.
Isn't he the father of all philosophy, Socrates?
Yeah, that's what they say. You know, all of Plato's writings are dialogues from Socrates. Yeah. And it is amazing how much the kind of structure of the way we think about philosophy and the questions.
And politics.
And politics. Well, yeah, that's right. That's right, because Plato's Politics was the first kind of political manifesto, if you like. It wasn't. I don't think we've ever had a country run by philosopher kings, but here you go. There's an eye.
Possibly not.
Yeah, so maybe we'd get him along, and then who else? Oh, maybe Mary Shelley, because she wrote a couple of good stories.
She did, actually. She did, yes, and at a very young age as well.
Yeah.
She wrote Frankenstein, I think, wasn't she?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, because she was daughter to who was it? Oh, poet.
Yeah, him.
Shelley, the poet.
Shelley, the poet, whose first name I can't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, she was obviously a very driven person as well. At that young age, at the time that she was living, to actually sit down and write what's probably the preeminent sci-fi book.
Yes, yeah, oh, it's amazing. Yeah, and it's a phenomenal story too. I mean, I think she was able to use her connections to get it taken off. But there's another really good example, right, of someone who, obviously a woman writer in those days, unusual, but still had all those connections to use.
Well, there's quite a few writers, as I understand, there's quite a few writers, female writers, that had to go under a non-diploma because they couldn't get published if they didn't.
Yeah, and I can imagine that.
You know, it's kind of, again, you look at back and you think, you know, society's obviously moved on, but some of that is still there.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's interesting. I think that would be an interesting conversation for sure.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure Plato would have something to say about Frankenstein too.
I mean, you think about that. I mean, that book, you know, is a commentary on the human condition to a large extent, isn't it?
It totally is. Yeah. What does it mean to be human?
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes we forget what it means to be human. That you know, I think, you know, for me, that connection to the community is a big part of that being human. You know, if you completely isolate yourself from where you live and those you live with, then you're not really being a human being. You know, you're a social animal.
Yeah, and I think that's right. In self-knowledge as well, right? Understanding that about yourself, about where you come from. I mean, all the stuff we're doing in criminal justice around whakapapa for Māori offenders, it's really about trying to help them understand where they sit in the world, which has been part of the issues.
I think that my eyes have been opened quite a lot over the last few years to the way that our criminal justice system treats, and I'm talking, when I'm saying our, I mean the Western criminal justice system treats people who aren't whites.
Yeah, and look,
it's very, very biased.
Yeah, our criminal justice system is based on 150-year-old principles, right?
Yep.
And it's a real frustration that we actually know some of the answers, but we haven't got the kind of moral courage to put them in place.
Yeah, and there's a lot of vested interest as well, I think.
You may well be right about that,
That's the other side of it. Certainly in other parts of the world, I think the vested interest is very much the influence that's controlling things. And, it's something we need to address because it is an issue that's been a problem for a very long time. Okay, going further afield, is there somewhere that you've not been to on the planet Earth that you'd really like to go to?
I'm really keen to get to Central Asia, which it just seems like a fascinating part of the world to me. And I remember reading a book that was written in the 1940s about kind of some intrepid explorers that made their way into the heartland of Uzbekistan and so on, and saw some of the kind of those eastern cities, essentially along the Silk Road and the old Khanates. And it just looks like an amazing part of the world to go to and quite remote. Yeah. I've got as far as Georgia, the country, not the state, but that is quite Western, really, by comparison. And it's a Christian country as well, as opposed to a Muslim country. But that part of the world just looks like a really unknown kind of...
From my point of view, I think there's that. And I've looked at Turkey. I've been to Turkey on holiday, but there's a archaeological site called Göbekli Tepe that's been discovered there that's kind of changing the view on where civilization started. It's showing a level of sophistication around farming and city growth that predates what we previously thought was the case. It's
fantastic.
10,000 years old.
And is that up in eastern Turkey, is it?
Right up in that sort of Central Asia part.
Yeah. And
it's sort of 10,000 years ago, there was organised farming and cities and governance and that. It predates what we thought by about 5,000 years. So
they might find a bit of Noah's Ark just parked in there as well.
Well, I mean, you never know, do you?
That's the area, eh?
You never know. And it's for me, it's again, a part of that is finding out where we came from.
Yeah.
It's part of that being part of who we really are. And seeing that our society that we're living in now is a lot older than I thought it was. And has been going on for a long time. It kind of makes you feel a bit more grounded in some ways. Yeah, and
it is fascinating. It is absolutely that part of the world is the cradle of civilization, and the layers from the sort of time that you're talking about, the early agrarian societies, through to the pre-Christian, then pre-Muslim, and it's had the Buddhists sweep across it and then be swept away, and amazing. It's just phenomenal.
There's been multiple societies running that part of the world for a long time, and I think it's also somewhere that has obviously got a very, very long history, and when you're in a new country like New Zealand, that's in terms of length of occupation is quite a lot shorter.
Yes.
Even if you consider the Maoris and how long they've been here. But then you look across the sea, across the Tasman to Australia, with the oldest continuously occupied piece of land.
Amazing.
They've got no voice.
It's truly extraordinary. Amazing.
Well, the world's an amazing place, and I think we need to see as much of it as we can so we can fully appreciate what we've got. That's really cool. What about music? Are you a music fan?
Oh, everyone's a music fan. Some, aren't they? Even if it's
not,
even if it's just pop music, it's still music, right?
So who's your favourite band?
Look, that's really not fair because there are so many out there. But I do think the Violent Femmes were a moment in time, and having seen them live with nothing but a snare drum, a bass guitar and a guitar and see them just light up a room was quite amazing. And it's kind of not quite punk, but quite edgy. I really enjoyed the Violent Femmes. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any artist you've never seen that you really wish you had?
Oh, I'm sure we can find maybe Freddie Mercury, right? See Freddie live, to see him strut up and down the stage. Yeah. That would have been something.
I was very fortunate that in 1986, I think it was, I went to Nebworth Park to see them on the Live Magic tour, and it absolutely blew my mind.
There you go.
250,000 people at that concert.
That's amazing.
And he totally had control of the entire audience the whole time he was on stage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the Wembley Live Aid concert rather. No other artist had that level of control.
Yeah.
And the performance was stunning, and just everything about it. He was, definitely a standout performer.
Yeah.
I don't think there's his like around at the moment.
No, and it didn't come by accident, right? No. I think people think it's all genius and no hard work, but clearly it's all hard work. Yeah.
There's plenty of hard work. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about today, Duncan? Because we've got through all of my questions in an hour, just about.
Oh no! Look, I didn't have anything. I was just very happy to come and have a yarn.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time again.
Thank you for listening to my podcast, A Penny for Your Thoughts, with me, Steve Penny. I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation, and I look forward to sharing my next conversation with you in the future. Thank you.